Hello everybody and welcome back to another training session. Today's training session is about supporting weaker students. And what we're really going to focus on today is how to better identify weaker students so we know where they are and who they are, and then make sure that they don't get left behind. Well, first question that you need to know is, how do you know? Well, you have to know that your students are weak first, so how do you identify them? But how do you really know they're weak? So if when I ask this question, you're thinking, well, I know my students, of course I know which ones are weak and which ones are not. Well, that could be one of the first mistakes that you're making. Because what you need to know to identify weak students, you have to really hear them say something or see that they're struggling with something in order to identify that they are weak. If it's just a feeling, then it could be down to other reasons like students not wanting to participate or students just having a bad day on that particular day. Here, so think about this. Was it their inability to answer a question? If it's just one question, maybe that again it could be down to that factors on that day. Was it their test scores? If it's a test scores, that's a much better measure because you can look at who has high and who has low test scores, and then you can start to support the ones who have lower test scores. However, again, we have to think, was it just a one-off? If it's just a one-off test score, there could be other reasons to explain this. Maybe they don't raise their hands in class. Well, again, that's not a good way of identifying it because not raising your hand in class could mean that you're just not engaged with that content. Don't complete the exercises. Again, this could be because they're lazy, not because they don't understand. Doesn't mean they're weak just because they can't answer or complete the exercises. So again, this quote, some of it's disappeared, but I know my students. I know who understands and who doesn't. Well, what's the problem with this statement is that it doesn't, you may know your students, you may have a great relationship with your students, but it's not a good measure to identify who understands, who does not understand, who is a weak student, who is a strong student. Just knowing them is not measurable. It's not a good measure. So what do you have to do? So in order for this, we're going to look at some activities, some exercises, and then I'm going to talk about these based on it. And each one of these exercises, the activities, has had a suggestion of how to support weaker students during this activity. So please take a look down there in the description. In the description, I put a link to this handout. So you'll have to look at this handout in order to understand about the different activities we can do, how to change them to engage students better, and how to engage weaker students. Because my first point that I want to make here is, do we really know who is weak or not, and how do we know whether they're weak or not? Whether it's based on our understanding of them or whether it's based on actual measurable things we can see. And these activities which are included in the handout are some examples of activities which should engage students and should give them an opportunity to demonstrate whether or not they do in fact understand. Okay, when you've had a look at those activities in handouts, then we can continue this video. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, please stop the video now and go back and look. So another really important thing is, as a teacher, you need to be sure about what you're trying to achieve, where you're trying to get to. Because in order to identify whether or not a student is weak, you need to identify whether or not they have been able to achieve the aims of the lesson. So you need to be very clear about what the actual aims of your lesson are. And as I stated on the slides, if you're not clear about what you're trying to accomplish, well, when you finish a lesson, maybe you do a reading task, maybe you do a listening task. If you look back, it's, well, what are the measurable aims of this lesson? If there's nothing to measure, it's very difficult to say who was able to achieve those aims, who was able to understand, and who did not. So what makes a good aim? Are the below aims good? So what makes a good aim? A good aim should be measurable. A good aim should be specific. A good aim should result in us being able to look back and say very clearly, did they achieve it or not? So if we're taking the aims that we have on the screen, teachers teach students how to use the past tense. Well, this is not a very good aim. This is not a good aim because it's far, far too big and general. It's also very difficult to teach the whole of past tense in just one lesson. So this is an unachievable aim. So if we were to try and measure it, then every student would be a weak student, because I guarantee you cannot achieve this in one lesson. Practice listening about sports vocabulary. This aim is a little bit better because it's more specific and it's definitely achievable. However, the students are not actually producing anything. So it's going to be very, very difficult to know whether or not the students have been able to learn something by the end of this lesson. Can they practice listening about sports vocabulary? Yes, it's very easy. I open up the recording and they're listening. But the aim should be focusing on and then producing something. And finally, to learn vocabulary about hobbies. So this is similar to my points that I made about the first aim and the second aim, is that first of all, it's too big. Second of all, okay, sure, you can teach them vocabulary about hobbies, but the word learn may mean different things to different people. Maybe to me, it means that you can remember that piece of vocabulary. Maybe for someone else means that you can remember it and you can say it within a sentence. Maybe for someone else means that you can use it within a question. Maybe for another person means that you can make a dialogue about it. So this is not a very good aim because it's very difficult to measure whether or not your students have achieved it. So again, my point, coming back to my main point, is that aims are very important, because if you have a clear aim, it will be very clear who has been able to achieve that aim and whether or not you have weak students in your class who, after a well-staged lesson, still cannot complete the aim. As I said in the previous slide, it has to be measurable. You have to have activities which enable you to measure the aim. Good activities should be engaging and allow all students to participate. If your activity are just allowing a few students in the class to participate, then it means that you're not giving yourself an opportunity to hear everybody participate and whether or not they understand and can complete the tasks you give them. Again, what I just said. So I want you to take a look at this example. Jane was teaching a grade 4 class and she couldn't understand why her students couldn't remember the story. So let's take a look at a lesson and then try and understand why. So she started with warm-up and a question time. She then reviewed vocabulary. She learned new vocabulary. She answered some questions from the book. She completed a listening activity. And then she had the students retell the story in groups. So what do you think? Can you think about, why do you think Jane's lesson was not successful? And yes, I can tell you it would not be successful. Take a think. Okay, if you need more time, please stop the video because I'm going to tell you the answer now. Well, Jane's lesson wasn't successful because her final activity is to have the students retell a story. However, nothing in her lesson is contributing, is supporting that final activity, which is testing whether or not students have been able to achieve their aim. So having a good aim is important. Having a good productive activity to test and to measure whether or not students have understood the aim is important, yes, but you also need to make sure that everything in your lesson is contributing to that aim. You're setting students up to, when you get to that productive activity, students can complete it because they've had enough input and enough practice to be able to complete it. And next, about motivation. So again, I mentioned earlier about the difference between a weak student and a student who doesn't want to participate, because they are very different. So what you need to think about is what motivates your students, what makes them feel interested in your lesson. And this may actually help you turn weak students that you think are weak into strong students, because they may go from not wanting to participate to wanting to participate. Here is an example of an idea that you could bring into your class to make it more motivating. You could take a photo. So here, this is a photo of a handsome gentleman, a teacher in school. And you could ask them a question such as, okay, complete this sentence. I was sitting here when... this can get the students to try and be creative, try and be silly. This can be something which motivates the students, especially if you can find out pictures of your students which have been taken during events or which have been taken during activities at the schools. Here is another idea. So here I use this activity for a grade 6 class. What I did is I got some anime superheroes which students were very interested in, and I gave them attributes. So you can see that there's strength, there's speed, there's intelligence. Then I had students write comparative sentence comparing these two people. So for example, I would say that Goku is stronger than Minato. And this was very motivating for the students because I use things which are an interest to them to practice the language in class. When I did this activity, I had students come to me saying, teacher, can we write 5 sentences? Can we write 6 sentences? Now, if you're getting students motivated to participate in your lessons, they're much more likely to join in, and that may be one way of dealing with students who you feel that are weak. So with weak students, there are long-term strategies and also short-term strategies. Let's look at some short-term strategies. So short-term strategies might be extra tutoring or extra homework or extra support during the specific class activities. It could be adapting lessons. So as previously discussed, it could be that we are adapting our lessons to make it more motivating, more interesting. Maybe we are adapting our lessons to provide more support, more scaffolding. Maybe we are adapting our lessons to make the productive task a little bit more simple. Maybe we are adding in more steps. Motivating students is really important, and it could be a successful short-term strategy. Having very clear and specific aims, as we have seen earlier in this video, clear and specific aims are very important because you need to know where you're going if you want to take your students there. Logical staging is make sure you have enough support, enough stages, so students are building up to being able to produce the final activity. Make sure that your lessons, your activities are engaging. So in the handout, I put on some engaging activities which let students be an active participant of those lessons, of those activities. And yeah, I mean, if you guys have any different short-term strategies, please comment below and let me know. I would love to hear it. But here are lots of different strategies which you can start to do to help support your students who you think are weaker in your class today. And something I want to stress with this video is that it's not always that students don't understand. It may mean they don't have an opportunity to participate. It may mean you've got a problem with your aim. It may mean that there's stages missing from your lesson. So longer term strategies. So you could try to use your classroom. So you could try to recent vocabulary, see if you have a place in your classroom where you can stick it. You can use routines where, maybe you spend the first 5 to 10 minutes of every lesson reviewing previous vocabulary, previous grammar, previous language you studied in class, which can help students to remember it on a more long-term basis. Like I just said. You can have mini vocabulary checks where maybe every 2 lessons you do a mini vocabulary test where you take 5 of the words you've learned recently and you do a 5-minute test. This can help students understand that you're going to be testing them at regular intervals so that they'll try to remember better. Again, it's a good check-in because if somebody gets poor marks on one test, it means that there may have been a problem with the way that you taught that specific subject. Whereas if students get poor marks on tests consistently, that's a very good indicator that they need more support. And finally, if you've tried everything in this video so far and it's still not working, well, what you can do is you can actually ask AI, you can ask GPT for more support. But remember, you should be very, very specific. If you just ask it, hey, how do I support my weak students? It will give you some not great ideas. Whereas if you say something like, I am an EFL teacher to Vietnamese students. I teach grade 1. I have 20 students in my class. I teach a class together as one class. Each period has 35 minutes. I cannot support my students outside of the class. Give me specific strategies to help me support my students within the time limit that I have with that class. If you are very specific, it will give you very specific strategies. If you ask it about the specific grammar point you're teaching, specific vocabulary you're teaching, it will give you even better ideas. So that's it. I would love if you could take a little bit about your time. Tell me underneath in the comments, what were some of the activities from the handout that you enjoyed? What were some ideas from this video that you want to apply in your classes? Remember, supporting weaker students doesn't always mean that they need extra tutoring, extra homework. You have to look at everything we've discussed in this video before you start those strategies, because it could just be one of these issues. All right, enjoy, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.